PodSaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in sassy. Sponsored by LeadrPro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of PodSaaS. I'm your host, Chris Shang, and today we have Sri from Rocketlane. How are you doing, Sri?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, of course. Really excited to kind of like explore and get to your journey, especially with Rocketlane and also your previous startup that you ended up, I think, selling or exiting to Freshdesk. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, cool.
Now called Freshworks. Back when we sold it, it was still Freshdesk.
Yeah, be exciting to kind of get into that journey, because obviously every founder typically is looking for that exit, and you having done it once before, just understanding kind of like what is the motivator or the driver for the next this new business that you ended up starting. It seems like a few years ago now, but seen some pretty tremendous success. So curious as to learnings that you went through from the first few different companies that you went through and built and started up, and then if there's anything that you kind of took away from those experiences that allowed you to ultimately scale and grow rapidly and maybe go to market a little bit faster than the typical average founder. So before we get into that though, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what Rocketlane is and also who makes a great customer for you guys?
Rocketlane is like a project collaboration tool, but what's unique about it is that it's meant for or built for customer facing projects, right, that are repeatable in nature. So most project tools were built for internal teams to sort of get work done. And then you add a layer of, hey, you can invite a customer as a guest or something like that. But Rocketlane was built ground up to enable both the internal and external collaboration to coexist, and for it to serve as an all-in-one sort of platform rather than, hey, we're going to use Slack plus Asana plus Google Docs. Instead, it's like one beautiful customer portal, which is going to enable all of the collaboration and work to happen in this shared workspace.
And who makes a great customer for you guys?
Anyone who's running initiatives with customers that take over 3 weeks, especially if it has like a methodology to it, which needs to be repeatable and consistent, is a great potential customer. It could be a marketing agency that's running campaigns with different kinds of customers planning and executing together, or it could be B2B tech company that's onboarding customers, setting them up for success, running this implementation project of sorts, which is actually our bread and butter today.
From my understanding, it's more about like the onboarding implementation process. And if it takes, on average, say 2 to 3 weeks, that whatever kind of software or service or whatever it might be, if that's the time period of how long it takes for you to get a new customer onto the platform, then they make a good fit for your software.
Absolutely. So usually trying to collaborate with the customer, hold each other accountable, and set up a bunch of things, integrations, data migrations, all of that.
Yeah.
So you can make a playbook out of it and execute in a very collaborative way, a better visibility for everyone involved, and a better experience for the customer through that journey.
Yeah, it speaks a lot to, coincidentally, I just had a meeting this morning with another former PodSaaS guest, but he's local to LA. So I met up with him for a coffee this morning. And one of the things that he was mentioning is that their software, caters to, it's like a content distribution platform, and they work a lot with the Major League Baseball, the NBA, a lot of these huge sports organizations. But when they were trying to go more downstream and start onboarding like more, like smaller enterprise type deals, one of their biggest issues isn't necessarily churn, but it was around the implementation process. And that's ultimately like where they would lose customers. And that was really the only interface that where they saw a lot of those issues. So I can see a lot of like real world application for your product. Just coincidentally, just having that conversation this morning made me think about that. But yeah, makes a ton of sense.
Awesome. Looks like a good introduction that can be made for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. The company's name is Greenfly, and the CEO is Daniel Kirshner. So I'll definitely make that introduction after this call. Cool. So let's just, I would love to jump into what we call like a series of rapid fire questions for us just to get to know you a little bit better as a person, before we hop into a little bit more about your personal journey and how you started Rocketlane and the impetus for that. Any questions around it? Nothing that we're going to hit is going to be like too personal or too crazy. So But we'll just, if you have any questions, we can answer them first.
No, I think hopefully it's going to be fun.
It'll be really easy and really light, promise you. Cool. First question is really easy. It's just, do you have a favorite entrepreneur and/or a favorite startup story?
The founder of Freshworks, Girish, is one of my favorite entrepreneurs. Mostly because I could sort of learn a whole new way he looks at the whole startup journey. I feel he looks at it as a game, and he's reaching new levels in the game, and going through the journey with that attitude of, hey, here's a problem I need to solve to get to the next level. And that was really fascinating, right? Like, it didn't feel, I'm sure he has his moments of stress and ups and downs, but from the outside it really felt like he was enjoying solving those puzzles. Even if you're stuck in a level for a while, it's about like cracking the code and getting to the next level. So that attitude, that sort of growth mindset, I think is something that I really love about him, and something that I learned as one of the few entrepreneurs I've watched from really close up. So yeah, I would say he's my favorite.
Have you taken any of those learnings and applied it to Rocketlane?
Not just me, but my co-founders as well. I have two co-founders. The three of us sort of liked what we saw in the Freshworks journey, liked the attitude that Girish brought to the table. So we try to get into a similar mindset when we face problems. I think it just helps, right? When you don't brood over a challenge, but instead think of it as, hey, let's figure this out.
Growing up as a kid, were you super technical? Like, I mean, is it something where you started coding at a young age, or is this something that happened more later? I asked because our next question is around what you wanted to be as a kid at like the 8, 9, 10-year-old range, and a lot of times we do have a lot of like technical founders that come in and that was their thing. They learned how to code very early on with some of those older computer systems. But how about you? What was that dream like for you?
My first brush with computers was when I was in the 6th grade, and it was sort of love at first sight, I would say, in terms of programming. Enjoyed it, and I always thought that that's what I'm gonna do from that moment, right? It wasn't when I was 10, probably when I was 11 or 12, probably. Yeah. But from then on, I just knew it had to be in this field. It so happens that right now in our startup, I don the business hat, not the programming and sort of product building side of things. But over a period of time, I just realized that it was about creating something from nothing. It was about building rather than necessarily programming as what I enjoyed about that process. And so I think I've programmed, but I've also been a product manager. Now obviously for the second time, building a company, building the culture, building the organization. All of those building is what is common to all of it, which I think I enjoy.
This is going to lead to my next question here, which is, as a founder, let alone like a CEO, right? Like you wear a lot of different types of hats, and you're going to pick up a lot of different skill sets. And I don't know if there's been something a skill set that you've taken on that you either loved or hated, but have a strong emotional disposition towards any one of them. But curious if there's been something along that journey that you've picked up that, again, you just really had a strong emotional connection. It could be positive or negative.
Sales part of it is something that was fairly new. I have been part of, obviously, doing a lot of sales even in my previous startup journey, but as leading a sales function, we hired a bunch of salespeople, chased targets, and made it happen. The energy that comes with it, the adrenaline rush that comes with it, is something that I've enjoyed this time. And I think we also got into a lot of solutioning around, hey, how do we make this deal happen, and where do we get stuck in the pipeline, what should we change about how we're doing our sales, and all of that has been really fun to do.
Yeah, I mean, it almost mirrors like the customer onboarding journey, right? Which is like there are all these little nuanced stages that you have to solve for. And it still all boils down to like human interaction and gaining visibility and transparency at every stage of the process. And sales, marketing, everything down to customer retention, success is all very similar, I think, in that metaphorical language for sure. Quick question here is, and I'll give you some context, but the question is, what's been maybe one of your most painful experiences, either personally or professionally? And the context is this, is that I think a lot of our moments of most exponential growth typically comes from being in places of, extreme discomfort, right? And has there been any situation like that, again, either personally or professionally, that obviously when you were going through it was like super hard or trying times, but now in hindsight, was character building for you?
The previous startup journey that we had, though we had a great outcome, was a very different, very contrasting journey to the one we're having now. A lot of learning, a lot of discomfort. We were fairly successful with bringing on board a bunch of brands, but I think we never built a big business. It was like chunky growth. There would be months of us telling ourselves and our team stories about how we can succeed, but then it wouldn't always result in like looking at things that that momentum, the constant momentum wasn't there. And we never managed to raise the formal round. We actually finally did put together a series, like a angel round, but it was like, I would say, whenever we got close to actually getting a VC to invest, I think I felt uncomfortable at that time. Somewhat of a imposter syndrome, I would say, where I would open up a lot more about the negatives towards that fag end, and things wouldn't move after that. Though I would say need to will it into happening, right? Like in a way, quite often you're believing that it's going to happen, and that's what makes things happen. But I think for me, in the last journey, it was a little different.
But I'm sure like in that moment of, imposter syndrome, I feel like as a founder is a fairly common experience, right? Especially because you're leading the troops into like, white space, green pastures kind of thing, where it's, most of the times it's been uncharted territories, and it can be super challenging, and you have to have that confidence to lead. But at the same time, it's a very lonely journey because, you don't necessarily know if these are the best decisions. I won't say right or wrong decisions, but if it's the best decision, and you're really never going to know, right? You're never going to know until you look back. That being said, obviously you're saying, chunky growth, finding the momentum, finding your cadence, building up, that speed to ultimately getting to a successful exit. What has been some of those moments that were really maybe hard or trying, and how did you motivate yourself?
I think there were a lot of small chance events that worked our way. And it all started adding up, right? And it could be some introduction that someone made for us, which resulted in getting into an accelerator program. That resulted in getting business from a big retailer. That resulted in us winning some, prize money from very popular investors. So there were those small things that would also be happening on the side, which told me that as long as we are putting ourselves out there and, trying to present the best version of ourselves everywhere that we go and, show up, that was creating some luck for us in a way, right? So, we need to put ourselves out there to get lucky. But it felt like, the more we do of it, things will fall in place. Something somewhere is going to click, and that's what happened, really, right? So I think just being persistent and having seen some signs of how luck favors the brave in a way, that's what helped us keep going and got us our results.
For sure. I think almost like a common theme too that I see a lot of times is perseverance, the ability just to outlast, right? So I think as the further deeper you get, a lot of the times the more uncomfortable it gets. And that's where it's like having a good network of advisors or founding team members, right, is really important, because those are the ones that are going to help push you guys as a collective unit past those momentary feelings of discomfort, which again, like I think is just outlasting the next. And the further that you're able to trek through, you're going to learn. I mean, if you have the right personality to figure out and problem solve, you're going to figure it out eventually to a certain degree. Obviously, the more reps you get at it, the little bit more effective and optimal that you are at the process. But I think that speaks to a lot of founders I've spoken to, which is I think just the ability to outlast. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily think that way. A lot of people have a desire to be entrepreneur or desire to build a business, but maybe don't have that ability to withstand time.
Especially in SaaS businesses, I feel while we all know that subscription revenue is sort of, it adds up and it's all there is a compounding that happens to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even your product has its own compounding that happens over a period of time.
Yeah.
Your brand has compounding that happens over a period of time. And I've seen like SaaS businesses that just manage to survive. At some point, they start thriving as well. There's so many companies that have been stagnant at a level for many years, and then they just take off after a few years. And I think the power of compounding really comes through in SaaS, is my feeling.
Another quick question here, and this is maybe a little bit more personal, but obviously starting a business, very stressful. We talked about going into uncharted territories and, especially with your previous startup. Is there anything that you do to gain clarity or to decompress, either for mental health, physical health, that you personally go to?
Yeah, I play badminton every Saturday, like 3 to 5 p.m. It's the one thing I will not miss for anything else.
That's awesome.
And I think I also just manage to keep my Saturdays free from any work.
Mm-hmm.
I may meet other founders and learn something from them, or meet a candidate for an interview once in a while. But in general, it's I keep it as my day to just create that space for myself.
Which is really important. It's super important. I mean, I feel like also a lot of the times giving yourself the grace of having that space ultimately leads to a lot of probably effective problem solving. Like it's really hard to kind of just sit there sometimes and just keep hammering away at the same thing over and over again. But by giving yourself that space, it unlocks or unblocks, I think, a lot of kind of that friction in the thinking process and the problem solving process, and it allows you to kind of get to there faster ultimately, which is funny enough. Last question here or two more questions before we end the series of rapid fire questions. But one is, do you have a bucket list? And two, what's one of the more ambitious items on that bucket list?
I actually don't have a bucket list, but I have one thing that I want to do someday. It's not a list, so it's like one item perhaps. I do have aspirations of composing music. I think that's after the startup, that's going to be my next thing. And if no one is going to feature my music somewhere, then I'm going to do it on my own. But yeah, you're going to listen to my music someday.
What kind of music do you like to compose?
The Bollywood film music. So I imagine that's what I'm going to end up doing, like either like an indie album or or like a movie album of some sort. I don't know if I'll get the opportunity to do that, but yeah, that would be the goal.
I come from a film background myself, so I completely understand it. And in terms of like, and that's something I might go back to after I go through my founder phase and tech phase. But I think it's also, there's a lot of mirroring between the creative process, whether it's in the arts and music or film or TV or whatever it is, the idea of producing. And I think building a company is very, very similar. And there's other people, I mean, it's not very common, but there are people I've ran into that come from the arts background, and they resonate with that metaphor. But the idea of piecing something together, pulling a lot of like these different components to ultimately make a finished product is a lot like building a business. Building a business may not, ever be a finite like end, it keeps on going. A little bit different from like a piece of art, but yeah, I think it's super interesting that you have that passion, and I can see how that can probably lend itself to maybe some of the soft skills that you've developed over the years too as a founder. Last question before we end these things is about the idea of legacy. And I understand the idea of legacy can also somewhat feel self-serving at times, but is there any impact that you want to leave on this earth before you leave it?
If we create a really successful business, and a lot of other entrepreneurs come from what we've created, I would feel proud about that. I would think that that should be my legacy if we manage to do that.
So if you're able to propel like the entrepreneurial journey and the spirit after you're gone from here, through the business that you've built, that would be a win for you.
Yep.
Cool. That's it for the series of rapid fire questions. So nothing crazy, right? But I think it was really great to kind of get to know, again, just your personality and just kind of some of your experiences that we've alluded to. I would love to kind of get to understanding like how you first got involved with startups. Obviously, you said you started off with a love relationship towards tech and towards coding and developing and the idea of building. When was your career path like out the gate? Well, it wasn't, because I saw that you worked at Verizon, so you did go through like a little bit more of that corporate journey. But how did you make that decision from that corporate journey to then like going into entrepreneurship, which I wasn't like that long that you were in corporate, but how was that? And then how was the journey into startup?
The product building was like the initial core, right? So I was a product manager at Verizon for 3 years. And it was, I would say, Verizon was a huge corporation, obviously, but the team that I was part of was like a smaller product building team that was, owning, creating this software that ran on set-top boxes, if you know Fios TV, and replacing some existing software that they had bought from a vendor before. So in a way, there was a startup spirit in that team, right? And that's what I really enjoyed. I then moved to 300, like Verizon obviously was like a huge company, moved to a 300-member company in Bombay, where again, I was leading a product. We actually did not ship much over there. It was not as small company as I thought it was. And I wanted to like create something, right? So that was what was driving me. So I actually went to a small startup after that, where I was pretty much like the first or second employee. Like first employee in India, there was one more employee in Canada before that. So depending on how you count it, first or second. Sure. And pretty much felt like I was, part of building the organization, part of building the product, everything, right? So right from looking for office space to hiring our first few folks I was really involved in that. And that's when I really understood what a startup journey feels like. That journey I went through made me feel it's easy to like build and launch an app that's going to have like great traction and easy to manage a team and all of that. So, went back home to Chennai, called a couple of my friends. One was working as a product manager at Zynga. The other was a platform engineer at eBay. So 3 of us came together to start up. And that's how the startup journey came about. So
that was that's the founding team behind your first startup that you ended up selling to Freshdesk, which is now Freshworks. Tell us about how you guys came up with that idea or that problem to solve.
The product that we sold to Freshworks was not what we first started out building. So we were trying to build a B2C messaging app to take on WhatsApp. This was back in 2012, before WhatsApp was as big as it is now. And we were focused on rich messaging, like voice messaging and stickers and so on, which we saw some of that popular in like the Far East, and it wasn't popular in India or the US, etc. at the time. So we thought, like, how do we change habits of people? How do we sort of bring this whole, voice messaging as a dominant play? So that's where we got started initially. But then we noticed that our users were chatting with us from within the app. They were sending us voice messages for feedback and what features they wanted and so on. So we said, why not take this, package it as a SDK that we can give to other app developers so they can get feedback and they can have conversations with their users. So that's how that came about. And once we gave that SDK to a bunch of people, we saw that the whole narrative around messaging, we're doing messaging with friends and family, and we enjoy that over like phone calls and emails. So why shouldn't you be able to message your businesses that you're engaging with as well? So that became the narrative for the product. And that's what Freshworks ended up acquiring.
So how long after you initially started the business from a B2C product to then making that pivot?
So yeah, we took 5 months to launch the product, and then 5 more months of running the B2C. I don't think we were all in on the B2B initially. We wanted to see where it goes, and like we also kept our B2C app live. But then one day, the certificate for the domain was up for renewal for the B2C product, and we realized we don't care about that anymore. And we didn't do that. We just let it die and focused on the B2B business.
Did it feel like a very organic transition?
So I would say when we were deciding to do the B2B, there was a little bit of like discussion, is this the right B2B to do, and like, shall we do this now, or should we wait, should we do it later, etc. But once we started down that path, I think the focus went into that sort of automatically, because we wanted to get it. We saw that as the side of the business that will make money faster. And there were a lot of competitors that had emerged for the B2C side. It didn't necessarily have the kind of traction we had expected either. So in a way, it deciding to do the B2B and sort of which idea to pick and so on had a little bit of conversation and discussion, and like we had to make a conscious decision that, okay, we are going to do this and we're going to start this now. But once that decision was made, like retiring the B2C, almost like it just happened gradually. We didn't even have to discuss it.
And then, so how long from switching to the B2B model to then being acquired by Freshdesk? How long was that period, and what was that journey like to evaluate the acquisition, and if that's something you guys wanted to do?
So it took us 2 years to build a decent business.
And so then you guys obviously got folded under Freshdesk for a while, right? Like that's typical. It's kind of like how acquisitions happen. So how long were you at Freshdesk before, I guess, making the decision to start Rocketlane? And it seems like it's the same co-founders, right? Okay. So then how do you, collectively make that decision?
Yeah, we spent more time than you would expect. We spent 4.5 years, even more than the vesting period you would expect people to stick on for, right? And the reason we stuck on for that long was because the business really took off. We relaunched our product for web and mobile. Initially, it had been only for mobile apps, and that sort of was growing really fast. It was the fastest product to reach various revenue milestones at Freshworks, and that kept us really motivated to be part of that growth story, enjoy the momentum. And that's my biggest learning, right? So optimize for momentum is like my biggest takeaway from that journey, because it solves so many problems. The challenges that come with like momentum are happy challenges, and your team is, even if they have to burn the midnight oil to fix issues or scale the product or figure out like handling support issues through the night, whatever it is, right? It's all leading to growth for them. It's the right kind of challenge for everyone. So that kept us there for like the last 2.5 years were like a very enjoyable journey. And the beginning of that last year, we sort of said, hey, now that we know what it feels like to run a business with like really strong momentum, let's do one more together. And this time we'll optimize for momentum. So that's sort of where that started. And I think we were all on the same page. We had similar outcomes, and hence I think it was easy for us to align behind that.
So what was the impetus for the idea behind Rocketlane? And then, how long from having that idea, then do you guys collectively make the decision to be like, hey, today's the day we're going to leave Freshworks and we're going to go start this? And how quickly did that transition happen? Was it almost like instantly, or did you guys have some time off, collect yourselves before jumping into this? Again, I mean, I think starting a business is sometimes like going to war, right? So it's like making a conscious decision to go into this other big chapter, right?
We looked at a bunch of ideas, to be honest. It wasn't like this was the first idea that came to our mind. One of the signs we liked was that when Slack launched shared channels as a feature, the first quarter that they launched, 75% of their paying customers started using that feature. So that told us something about cross-org collaboration, you know, that, doing it over email wasn't working out for people. They wanted a better way to collaborate across companies. And I had personally been as like head of the business unit, overseeing a lot of our large customer onboarding journeys, like when we onboarded Discover Cards or Klarna or Nokia, or like we had more than like lots of large customers that we had seen journey with. I was always in the dark as to what's really happening in those projects, right?
Yeah.
So I would need to ask someone or know which email to open, which spreadsheet to open to know the true status of where things are at. And I thought, hey, if that's an important phase of the customer journey. We're onboarding a very large customer, and we don't have great visibility. The customer doesn't have great visibility. Things get delayed. It's not great customer experience. We are customer centric in so many places, but not in this place. Beginning of 2019, we said, okay, we would ideally want to do one more with this momentum behind us. We waited for like a certain, reaching a certain landmark in terms of revenues of the product that we were running. We told Girish, the founder of Freshworks, that, hey, we want to go and do one more startup. He asked that we stay till end of the year and take the business to a certain level. And we obliged. We said, okay, we'll stick on. It's not like we are in a hurry to, we're not building something on the side or any of that. Decided we will take a break early 2020 and then start the new journey. In the middle of that break, COVID happened.
Yeah.
And then we said, okay, what are we waiting for sitting at home? Let's get started.
So COVID was the the reason that you guys ended up starting this a little bit sooner than later, and just made that decision to make that jump and leap. Cool. And so when did you feel like you had a sense of market fit with this product? Is it, when you guys came up with the idea, did you do any like market research, market testing? Now that you kind of have gone through, not only starting your first business, but then selling it and then going through that momentum growth phase that you said, did you learn a lot of those kinds of things and kind of like those different philosophies to try to get to market fit before you guys actually started building a line of code?
We did a lot of research before writing the single line of code. Yeah. We sort of interviewed a lot of people. We talked to VCs, we talked to founders, we talked to people running those functions. So we understand, does it come up in board conversations? Is it important enough? Is it a high priority item for these people? So those were signals we looked at. Was there a single decision maker? Was there going to be a budget for it? All of those are considerations, right? And is there someone else in the market with some level of momentum solving this problem? Sure. That's one more thing we looked at as well. And I think for us, we saw a lot of those things validated, and it felt like I was trying to validate a lot of the signals we were seeing, and I had a list of things that make a market hard. Yeah. And where we sort of, was this going to work out for us or not? So I think we were looking for those signs and making it happen in a way.
Great conversation, man. I think it was really great, and in terms of insightfulness, and I get just this energy of like patience from you, if anything, like from this conversation, like the idea of patience has been really strong, and a key part of the process. I feel like, at least for you and your team, it's not necessarily a virtue that a lot of founders always have, but it seems to have worked out very, very well for you guys. So congratulations on the success so far. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to doing this.
Thanks, Chris. And you mentioned you're in LA?
I am based in LA, correct? Yeah. I'm in the Santa Monica area right now.
We could have done this in person if I'd known. I'm actually there tonight, starting tonight. Till Thursday.
Okay. Are you coming down for personal or for professional?
Professional. There is a event called the Montgomery Summit. I think it is probably in the Santa Monica area.
Yeah, probably. Got it. Cool. Well, I mean, I'll follow up with you after this, but yeah, would love to grab a coffee with you or something like that along the lines in person if you have the time in the next few days.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks, Sri. Bye-bye.